The fall of the 300 was not the end of Greece, but the fuse for a relentless and bloody revenge. Forget diplomacy. With Athens in flames, the only language left was pure violence. What happened at Plataea was not a common battle. It was a cold, calculated mass execution. They stopped being victims to become the greatest butchers in ancient Greek history. Prepare to see how the Spartan war machine washed its honor with rivers of Persian blood. The Spartans finally woke up to the threat of an alliance between Athens and Persia. In a single night, the ephors issued an order that defied logic. Empty the city. The war machine marched with silent fury. They didn't send a vanguard, but the total army. When Sparta decides to move, the ground of Greece shakes, and the fate of empires is rewritten by the brute force of its legendary warriors. 5,000 elite Spartiates donned their armor, bringing with them an unprecedented force, the slaves. For every single Spartan, 7 helots were armed, totaling 35,000 servants marching alongside their masters. Added to the allies, a column of 45,000 men departed before dawn. The manhunt had begun. The goal was not just to win, but to exterminate every Persian invader who dared to profane Greek soil. General Mardonius was no fool. His army was a professional machine. He kept 300,000 veterans, including the Immortals, relying on tactics. Knowing that facing hoplites in narrow streets was suicide, he retreated strategically. His plan was to lure the Greeks into open terrain, where his cavalry could surround and slaughter them, turning the battlefield into a veritable slaughterhouse for the Spartans. He chose the plains of Plataea. The Greek phalanx was powerful but slow. On flat ground, the Persian cavalry could flank the formation easily. Mardonius built a giant wooden fortification and waited. He invited the Greeks to his hunting ground, confident that Spartan arrogance would lead them straight to death, marching blindly into their own destruction at the hands of his elite archers. Upon sighting the Persian tents, the Greeks stopped. Pausanias refused to go down to the plain, staying on the protected slopes. A game of patience began. Mardonius in the valley, Pausanias on the ridge. Impatient for the kill, the Persian general decided to break the deadlock, sending his elite cavalry to harass the Greek lines, hoping to force a fatal error that would deliver the Spartans directly to the massacre. Mecistius was no ordinary commander. He was a mountain mounted on a stallion with golden bridles. He led lightning attacks, mocking the Greeks and calling them cowards. Arrows rained down, and Greek morale bled. It seemed no one could stop him until 300 Athenians, echoing the courage of Thermopylae, accepted the suicide mission to descend into the valley and face the cavalry on open, deadly ground. Luck favored the bold when an arrow took down Mecistius's horse. But killing him was another story. His golden scale armor was impenetrable, shattering Greek blades like glass. He fought like a human tank until a soldier, realizing the only flaw, drove a spear through the eye-hole of his helmet. The giant fell, and his body was paraded as a macabre trophy for the troops. The euphoria of Mecistius's death evaporated quickly under the merciless August sun. Dehydration killed faster than Persian swords. Pausanias, desperate for water, ordered a risky maneuver. Move the entire army of 100,000 men to the Gargaphia spring. It seemed tactically sound, but as they descended from the safe hills, they exposed their necks. Mardonius didn't attack. He just watched and smiled. The Persian general triggered his logistical trap. Instead of a frontal clash, he sent cavalry to bypass the Greek army and cut the supply lines in the rear. A caravan of 500 wagons with food was intercepted and massacred. Oxen and drivers were slaughtered. Suddenly, the Battle of Plataea stopped being about glory and became a brutal, primitive struggle against imminent starvation. For 8 days, the Greek army cooked in the heat, unable to advance or retreat. Persian cavalry turned their lives into hell, riding to the riverbank to loose arrows and laugh. They taunted the Spartans, challenging their legendary courage. Pausanias maintained iron discipline, forbidding any break in formation, but discipline does not quench thirst, nor fill the stomachs of starving soldiers. On the 11th day, Mardonius grew tired of playing and decided to suffocate the prey. He ordered his cavalry to ignore the front lines and attack the Greeks' most valuable asset, the Gargaphia Spring. It wasn't combat, it was pure vandalism. Horses trampled the spring, turning the only drinkable water into toxic, undrinkable mud. Now, 100,000 men were trapped, starving, and without a drop of water. Panic began to corrode the alliance. Athenians wanted to attack, Corinthians wanted to flee. Pausanias, seeing the army on the brink of mutiny and death by thirst, took a decision considered one of the most dangerous in warfare: a tactical night retreat. The plan was to fall back to a defensive position called the island, where there was fresh water. It required absolute silence and perfect coordination, two things they didn't have. As soon as the sun set, Pausanias's logical plan turned into a tragic comedy of errors. The retreat was supposed to be orderly, but turned into chaos. Units didn't move in sync. Communication failed in the darkness. What was supposed to be a tactical repositioning looked to any observer like the total collapse of the Greek coalition. They were about to hand over Western civilization through pure incompetence. The center of the Greek line, composed of smaller contingents, didn't just retreat, they broke. Terrified by the darkness and Persian cavalry, they fled miles back, hiding near the Temple of Hera, effectively taking half the army out of the battle before it even began. In the dead of night, fear had decimated Greek forces more efficiently than any Persian arrow could. But the biggest problem was on the Spartan wing, and his name was Amompharetus. The Spartan captain refused the retreat order, deeming it a dishonor. While the army tried to flee in silence, he started a shouting match with Pausanias. Amompharetus lifted a massive rock with both hands and threw it at the regent's feet, symbolically voting against fleeing. Spartan pride was about to get everyone killed. The sun rose, revealing absolute disaster. The Athenians were far away, the center had fled, and the Spartans were isolated. Mardonius didn't see strategy, he saw cowardice. Laughing, he ordered a total attack, believing victory was already his. Without forming lines, the Persian horde surged like a disorderly tsunami, screaming for blood, believing they would hunt fugitives from behind, unaware they were waking the beast. The cavalry crossed the river, followed by thousands of archers who planted their shields and darkened the sky with arrows. Instead of ordering a charge or a retreat, Pausanias did the unthinkable. He ordered the Spartans to stop and kneel under the rain of death. He turned his back on the enemy and called a priest. There would be no fight until the gods gave permission through the liver of a sacrificed goat. Imagine the psychological terror, thousands of arrows striking bronze shields like metallic hail. Men screamed as they were hit in the neck and groin, while the general inspected bloody entrails. The gods said no, and Pausanias waited. It was a discipline bordering on insanity. They were being massacred passively, bronze statues bleeding while the enemy closed in. If it was bad for the Spartans, it was hell on earth for the 35,000 helots. Without bronze armor, protected only by skins or wicker, they died by the thousands. They watched their masters standing motionless and didn't understand that suicidal ritual. The killing wasn't a battle, it was industrial and slow. The ground began to turn into red mud, and the frustration of dying without striking a single blow was worse than the physical pain itself. The Persian infantry got within shouting distance, pouring fire at point-blank range. The Tegean allies couldn't take it anymore and started moving to attack without orders. Pausanias, with tears in his eyes, looked at the Temple of Hera and screamed a desperate prayer. The rigidity of the Phalanx, which seemed like a weakness, was the only thing preventing total defeat. He held the formation at the absolute limit of mental breakdown. Finally, at the third sacrifice, the omens shifted. The liver was clean. Pausanias didn't need a speech. He simply raised his spear. The iron discipline that froze 10,000 men dissolved in an instant. The statues came to life. The Spartans didn't just walk, they exploded forward. The pent-up rage of an hour of passive dying was released in a single collective roar of vengeance. The shock was not the clanging of swords. It was the sickening sound of wood shattering against solid bronze. The Persian wall of wicker shields, excellent against arrows, disintegrated against the mass of tons of the charging phalanx. The front ranks of the Immortals were physically lifted off the ground and trampled. The barrier fell, and the Spartans entered the Persian formation like wolves into a flock of sheep. The truth must be told. The Persians were not cowards. They grabbed Spartan spears with their bare hands, snapping the wood in a desperate effort. They threw themselves against the shields with daggers, fighting with the ferocity of lions. But courage does not beat physics. Their linen tunics didn't stop Greek bronze. When a Spartan struck, he went through bone. When a Persian struck, his blade merely glanced off. When the long spears shattered, the true massacre began. The Spartans drew the xiphos, the short sword made for carnage in tight spaces. They moved with robotic efficiency, stab to the face, bash with the shield rim, step over the corpse. The helots, formerly victims, now swarmed into the gaps, finishing off the wounded with stones and knives. It was a meat grinder operating at maximum capacity. In the center of the chaos, Mardonius fought bravely on his white horse, surrounded by 1,000 elite guards. His presence held the army together. The Spartans saw him, and the battle changed focus. It was no longer about winning, it was an assassination mission. The Phalanx pivoted and began grinding its way toward the general. They ignored the gold and silver on the ground. They just wanted the head of the man who burned Athens. It was Arimnestos, a legendary Spartan who ended the reign of terror. Bravery doesn't stop a heavy rock. The blow crushed Mardonius's skull, dropping Xerxes' cousin into the bloody dust. The moment the general fell, the Persian army died with him. Without the head, the snake writhed in panic. The Immortals, the known world's most feared killers, dropped their weapons and ran like children. They fled to their wooden stockade, voluntarily trapping themselves in a giant coffin. When the Athenians breached the walls, what followed wasn't war. It was systematic extermination. The Greeks, driven by the hatred of Thermopylae and burned Athens, took no prisoners. The ground turned into a quagmire of blood up to the ankles. Of 300,000 invaders, nearly an entire generation was erased from existence. When the screaming stopped, the silence revealed unimaginable fortune. The camp was a palace of gold. Pausanias, covered in dirt and glory, entered the royal tent and ordered a Persian banquet from the captured chefs and a black broth from his cooks. He placed the dishes side by side, the cuisine of the earth's greatest empire against the food of poor soldiers. History's greatest irony was served on the table. Pausanias laughed and pointed to the luxury. Look at the folly of this leader. Having all this, he came to rob us, who have so little. That scene defined the identity of the West, austere freedom defeating luxurious tyranny. But history is cruel. That very gold Pausanias mocked that day would eventually corrupt him years later. The victory at Plataea saved Greece, but the greed born there would destroy its hero. Thermopylae was the symbol, but Plataea was the vengeance. The 10,000 collected the debt of the 300, with interest in blood, proving that free men are unbeatable. If this visceral story of brutal justice held your attention, smash that like button now. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to discover the bloody truths books ignore. Comment below, was the Spartan revenge just?